Yeah, greetings everybody. Uh, I'm doing this video today about the four prerogatives set by me for the so-called Black American nation. And I think it is a travesty and a disgrace that after allegedly 400 years of continuous oppression and captivity, that nobody has come to the conclusion that the so-called Negro must be a free, independent nation. And all of the people who came before me were interested in coexisting with their oppressor. They call this liberalism, being a punk to a more strong, like in prison, if a person is punked out, they get passed around by the stronger prisoners for whatever needs or purposes they see fit. And this is the position the so-called Black Americans have in America, the men and the women. They both are competing with each other to be close to their oppressor. But that being said, let me talk about these four prerogatives. And I believe we should pursue these prerogatives vigorously and diligently until they are fulfilled. And that true freedom on that day, true freedom and salvation will be attained. Number one, establish an independent nation. This could be done, if we look at history, by a couple of people. Couldn't declare independence and sign a document, a Declaration of Independence. And if that document is not accepted by the oppressive parties, then a war must be fought. And members of the prospective new nation, republic, must join to fight that war to bring about this peace, this freedom. And if we look at history with the United States government got recognized as a sovereign independent nation from a country in Africa, West Africa, called Morocco. They bestowed the United States with sovereignty. And the so-called Negro Republic can also go to Africa and get recognized as an independent sovereign nation. But the Negro don't have the courage or the fortitude or even the capacity to even think on this type of level. They see themselves as a perpetual second-class, little, small, sub-citizen in the United States. Number two, establish a central bank. A central bank can be accomplished before or after the establishment of an independent nation or republic. But once the independent nation and republic is actually established, we are no longer bound to the so-called rules and regulations set by the United States. They're bureaucratic rules, endless red tape to prevent you from having not even a central bank, but a small bank. But once you become an independent nation, you determine the requirements, prerequisites to establish a central bank, which will be used to finance your domestic and international endeavors and desires. Number three, reintegrate the Black so-called nation. In 1965, the so-called American Negro was disintegrated into small fragments and segments that went into oblivion, that scattered across the United States. And when they disintegrated into these small segments, they have been systematically wiped out bit by bit, piece by piece. And the weaker parts of the so-called fragments were totally annihilated due to poverty and abortions, while the so-called affluent fragments was thinking about their own salvation, being in close proximity to wealthy, affluent Caucasians until that they themselves was rejected and thrown out the window. And these older generations of people who caused this so-called fragmentation, most of them are dead, and they left no legacy. So it's now up to the so-called descendants, the remnants of this disintegration, to go back into the original form when they actually had power and solidarity and a common enemy. Now the fragments, the destroyed fragments of the Negro, see each fragmented part as the enemy, while the true enemy, the oppressor who runs this country, is sitting back getting richer out of all of them, getting wealthier, getting more powerful, while you're being annihilated and replaced due to the disintegration. So number 3 is to reintegrate the disintegrated black so-called nation. And number 4 is to seek reparations. The U.S. government is delinquent on their debt owed, the so-called 40 acres and a mule that they owe the so-called American Negro. They have never paid the money, and when they did so-called allow them to join the country, I think in 1886, after the 14th Amendment, they took everything away and made the so-called Negro sharecroppers, in which they actually forced them to foreclose on most of the land that they have. So from 1886 up until 2021, the U.S. government has been stealing millions of acres of land from the so-called American Negro, and they still haven't paid the debt that they owe for slavery, Jim Crow, atrocities, and endless amounts of crimes against humanity. So this debt need to be paid. They need to be sent a letter informing them of the debt and giving them a time limit to pay this debt, or they will be reported to all credit agencies, or they will be forced to pay that money. This debt they haven't been sent a bill. The Negroes who've been leading the charge for the last 60 years has been just getting their own fat pockets fat, while everybody else suffered, and they all shriveled up and old dying because they thought they was going to live forever in this so-called salvation of integration. And now we left here looking stupid with nothing, zero. And the Negro who found a way to survive under oppression, who is comfortable living under oppression, they will be the first ones to fight you from separating. The parasites, the ambulance chasers, the poverty pimps who sit around and talk about the history of us being oppressed, the struggles of oppression, but we still are oppressed. So we're teaching each other about failures who didn't succeed. They lost. But these people living in big mansions, living lavishly next to their Caucasian neighbors, feeding us information, selling us information about oppression, so we can just sit back and be comfortable. What they say, so we can suffer peacefully while they sit back living lavishly, living large in their big mansions. But this is the worst enemy right here, the Negro who found an economy based on the oppression of their own people. They are just as terrible as the so-called true oppressor. But yeah, this is what I'm talking about right here. I'm gonna keep reiterating this idea of the 4 prerogatives: establish a republic or independent nation, establish a central banking institution, reintegrate into the black community, and to pursue and seek reparations from the United States government to pay for their crimes, hundreds of years of crimes against the humanity.